Imagine yourself in the middle of a cold medieval night. The air outside is sharp, carrying the bite of frost that creeps into every corner of the countryside. The wind whispers through the trees, rattling bare branches against the sky. There is no modern heating, no switch to flip, no blanket fresh from a dryer. You are inside a stone cottage or a timber-framed house, and the chill presses against the walls. The only thing standing between you and the freezing dark is the ingenuity of medieval people. How they learned to survive long nights without the comforts we take for granted today? This is the story of how people in the Middle Ages kept warm at night. It is not a tale of cozy electric blankets or central heating, but of glowing hearths, flickering candles, heavy woolen garments, and simple rituals of survival. In this gentle history, we will drift into the daily lives of medieval families, explore how the poor and the rich endured the cold, and uncover the forgotten ways they fought off winter's grasp. As you listen, allow yourself to sink into the calm rhythm of the past, and let your imagination paint the picture of medieval warmth in the long, frozen nights of the Middle Ages. When the sun dipped below the horizon in medieval Europe, darkness came quickly. Days were shorter, and winters felt longer. In villages and towns, people hurried to finish their tasks before the last light faded. Once night fell, warmth became the greatest need. Fires were stoked, shutters closed, and families gathered close together, for company was one of the strongest sources of heat. In small cottages, it was common for everyone to sleep in the same room. Parents, children, and sometimes even animals shared the same space, their body heat mingling under layers of coarse blankets. The hearth was the heart of the medieval home. It was more than a place for cooking, it was the center of warmth. In simple cottages, the hearth was often just a fire pit in the middle of the floor, with smoke rising through a hole in the roof. Wealthier homes had fireplaces with chimneys, but for most people, smoke hung heavy in the air. Families kept the fire burning as long as possible, feeding it with wood, peat, or dried animal dung. The crackle of flames was more than comfort, it was survival. Without the fire, the cold could seep in and make the night unbearable. The poor, who had little fuel to spare, often rationed their wood carefully. Gathering firewood was hard work, and in some regions, forests were controlled by lords, meaning peasants had limited rights to collect wood. To save fuel, fires were banked at night. This meant covering the glowing embers with ash to keep them alive until morning, so that the fire could be easily revived without wasting more wood. The morning ritual of stirring the hearth and coaxing it back into flame was as essential as the nighttime ritual of banking it before bed. But fire alone was never enough. Clothing played an important role in keeping warm. Medieval people wore layers of wool, linen, and sometimes fur. At night, they often slept in their day clothes or in long tunics that acted like nightshirts. Woolen socks, hats, and cloaks were kept close at hand. In fact, medieval people believed strongly in the importance of covering the head while sleeping. The idea of a nightcap, which we see in old illustrations, came from this tradition. Heat escapes quickly from the head, and without hats or caps, the cold air of winter nights could be dangerous. Beds were another important defense against the cold. For wealthy households, beds were prized possessions, often handed down as family heirlooms. A noble bed could be large, built with a wooden frame, ropes or boards for support, and stuffed mattresses filled with straw, feathers, or wool. Heavy curtains hung from bed frames, enclosing sleepers in a small cocoon that trapped body heat. These bed curtains were not only for privacy, but also for warmth. By drawing them shut, nobles created a smaller, warmer space inside a chilly chamber. For peasants, beds were simpler, but served the same purpose. Many families slept on straw mattresses laid directly on the floor, with animal skins spread over them. In some homes, raised wooden platforms held straw bedding. Families often shared the same bed, pressing close together under layers of coarse wool blankets. Children huddled with parents, and even livestock sometimes came indoors. Chickens, goats, or small pigs were brought inside cottages during winter nights, their body heat adding to the warmth of the household. It might sound uncomfortable to us now, but to a medieval family, it was simply a practical way to survive. The materials used for bedding also made a difference. Straw was the most common filler for mattresses. It was inexpensive and easy to gather after harvest, though it needed to be replaced regularly, as it became flat or attracted pests. Wealthier families preferred feather beds, which were much softer and warmer. A feather bed, combined with woolen blankets and fur throws, created an insulated nest against the cold. In noble houses, it was not unusual for beds to be layered with several types of blankets. Linen sheets, wool covers, and fur cloaks piled high. In castles and manors, the architecture itself shaped how people kept warm. Stone walls held in the chill, and large, drafty halls were difficult to heat. The great hall of a castle might have a massive fireplace, but even so, the warmth rarely reached every corner. Servants often shivered, while nobles sat closer to the flames. In bedchambers, thick tapestries were hung on walls to reduce drafts and add insulation. Floors were covered with rushes or carpets for the same reason. Bed curtains, heavy blankets, and furs became vital tools for nobles, just as straw, wool, and shared warmth were critical to peasants. Lighting also played a role in warmth. Candles and oil lamps provided a faint glow in the darkness, and while their flames were small, they added a little heat to a room. Tallow candles, made from animal fat, were common in poorer homes, though they smoked and smelled unpleasant. Wealthier families used beeswax candles, which burned cleaner. Though candles alone could not heat a room, they created a sense of comfort, softening the harshness of a winter night. There were also small, portable ways of carrying heat to bed. One common method was the bed warmer, a metal pan filled with hot coals carried into bed to warm the sheets. The pan was passed between blankets before the sleeper climbed in. Care was taken not to let the embers burn the fabric, but it provided a burst of warmth in the first moments of lying down. Another method was the hot stone or brick, heated by the fire and then wrapped in cloth to be tucked at the foot of the bed. These simple tricks brought a brief but welcome comfort during the coldest hours. Of course, not everyone had equal access to warmth. For the very poor, the struggle was greater. Many lived in one-room huts with thin walls and little insulation. They relied heavily on their hearth, their clothing, and each other's company. It was common for families to share beds not only for affection but for necessity. In times of famine or poverty, when even firewood was scarce, survival through winter nights became an act of endurance. Oral histories and medieval records tell us that winters could be deadly, especially when crops failed and people lacked fuel for their fires. Still, despite the hardships, medieval people developed routines that gave structure to their nights. The act of preparing for bed was more than just lying down. It was a process of securing warmth. Fires were banked, shutters closed, candles snuffed, and blankets pulled close. People prayed for safety during the night, for warmth was not only a physical comfort, but also a spiritual one. To be warm was to be alive. To lose warmth was to risk illness or death. In monasteries, warmth was both limited and symbolic. Monks lived by strict rules of discipline, often denying themselves comforts. Their cloisters were cold, their stone floors unheated. At night, monks wrapped themselves in simple woolen habits and cloaks. They slept in communal dormitories, where body heat offered some relief, though drafts were constant. For monks, enduring the cold was seen as a form of devotion, a way to discipline the flesh and turn the mind toward prayer. Fires were rare, except in the kitchens or infirmaries. Yet even in this austerity, the rhythm of monastic life gave structure to the cold nights, with midnight prayers breaking the long silence. For the nobility, warmth was also a marker of wealth and power. To own a feather bed, fur-lined cloaks, and richly decorated tapestries was not just comfort. It was status. The richer the fabrics, the heavier the blankets, the more insulated the chamber, the higher the prestige. Guests at noble banquets would retreat to richly furnished rooms, drawing bed curtains around themselves as they sank into feather beds under furs. Servants prepared their beds, sometimes even warming them beforehand with hot coals. Compared to the hardships of peasant cottages, the noble bedchamber was a world of relative comfort. Though still far colder than what we know today, even so, the cold left its mark on everyone. Frost gathered on windows, drafts crept under doors, and icy winds howled outside. Winter nights were long, stretching for hours, and medieval people learned to adapt. They went to bed earlier in winter, rising later when the sun returned. Sleep was often divided into two parts, known as first sleep and second sleep, with a period of wakefulness in the middle of the night. During this time, people might tend the fire, pray, talk quietly, or even slip into neighbors' homes. The rhythm of broken sleep, paired with the search for warmth, shaped medieval nights in ways that are now unfamiliar to us. In every household, rich or poor, warmth was a shared effort. Families gathered close, servants huddled together, monks endured with patience, and nobles draped themselves in luxury. Yet all lived under the same cold stars, the same long nights, the same winter skies. Warmth was never guaranteed, but it was always pursued, with fires, with furs, with prayers, with company. As you imagine these medieval nights, picture the glow of a hearth casting light on rough stone walls. Hear the rustle of straw as a family settles in, pulling a woolen blanket close. See the flicker of a candle as it is blown out, leaving only the crackle of embers in the dark. The medieval night was cold, but it was also full of small comforts, born of necessity, faith, and the closeness of human company. And in this, perhaps, they found a warmth deeper than fire, the warmth of survival, together, against the long winter nights. When night fell in the Middle Ages, the question of warmth became more than a matter of comfort. It was often a matter of survival. The world outside was filled with icy winds, heavy snow, and the kind of cold that seeped into stone walls and wooden beams. And so, families, servants, and travelers alike developed a rhythm for facing the dark, cold nights of winter. In great stone castles, life seemed secure and majestic from the outside. But inside those tall towers and thick walls, warmth was not guaranteed. The stones, while strong against attack, were terrible at holding heat. Once the sun set, the chill wrapped itself around every corner of the hall. The great fireplaces, those massive hearths that blazed in the main chambers, were the heart of warmth. But even a roaring fire could not heat an entire castle. Instead, warmth was something carefully managed. Nobles and their households gathered close to the blaze, sitting in circles around the light, talking, eating, or simply staying still, letting their bodies soak in the precious heat. As the fire burned, servants brought bundles of wood, often oak or ash, which burned steadily through the night. Maintaining these fires was a job of its own, and if the flames ever went out, it could take much effort to relight them. For this reason, embers were carefully banked before sleep, covered with ash, so that they would smolder until morning. When the fire could be rekindled, with just a breath of air and a few small sticks, bedrooms in castles were rarely warm. Nobles retired to their chambers wrapped in heavy gowns, and their beds were a fortress of their own. Curtains surrounded many of these beds, not only for privacy, but also to trap warmth inside. The bedding was layered with wool blankets and furs. Sometimes feather mattresses were used, softer and warmer than straw. And beneath the covers, a small device called a bed warmer might be used. This was a pan filled with hot coals, slipped under the blankets to chase away the first bite of cold. And even with these comforts, the air remained frosty. And it was not unusual to see one's breath rising like mist in the early hours. In the cottages of peasants, the scene was humbler, but in some ways more intimate. The fire in the hearth was the center of life. It was not only for cooking, but also for light, warmth, and protection. In many homes, the entire family gathered near the fire before bed. The children, tired from a long day of work, might doze on benches or straw mats near the glowing embers. Parents talked in low voices, sometimes sharing stories, songs, prayers, as the firelight flickered across the rough wooden walls. Beds in these cottages were simple, straw piled in sacks covered with woolen cloth or animal skins. In the harshest winters, families sometimes slept close together in the same bed, layering themselves with furs, old cloaks, and anything that might hold warmth. The closeness of bodies became as valuable as any blanket, and the steady breathing of loved ones provided both comfort and survival. Animals, too, were often kept indoors during the winter, especially in smaller cottages. Chickens, goats, or even a cow might share the same roof, their body heat adding a surprising degree of warmth to the small room. In medieval towns and villages, warmth could also be found in taverns and inns. Travelers, merchants, and lonely wanderers sought not just food and ale, but the glow of the hearth. Taverns often had large fires burning late into the night, and people would crowd around them, drinking, talking, or simply watching the flames. The sound of crackling wood, the laughter of strangers, the thick smell of smoke created an atmosphere that, while noisy, offered relief from the biting cold outdoors. Those who could afford a bed upstairs would find it simple but serviceable: woolen blankets, be a fur or two, and the comfort of being indoors instead of under the open sky. For those without homes or money, the cold was a cruel companion. Many poor souls sought corners of stables, barns, or even the nooks of city walls to survive the winter night. Some were lucky to find the dying warmth of a communal fire left in a village square, where ashes glowed faintly under a blanket of snow. And so, medieval life carried this constant contrast between noble chambers with furs and feather beds, and the harsh cold endured by peasants with nothing more than straw and shared breath to shield them. But warmth was not only about fire and blankets. The medieval people turned to clever habits and customs. Clothing at night was as important as bedding. Woolen tunics, linen underclothes, and layers of cloaks provided insulation. Many slept wearing caps to keep their heads warm, since so much heat escapes through the scalp. Hands and feet were wrapped in cloth or leather shoes, even indoors. These small acts of preparation could mean the difference between waking up comfortably or suffering a frozen, sleepless night. The rhythm of evenings was guided by the fire.
Ow!
Before bed, the household gathered around it one last time. Prayers were whispered, stories were shared, and plans for the next day were spoken in gentle tones. Then, one by one, the members of the house retreated to their beds. Silence fell except for the occasional crack of burning wood or the howl of wind outside. Ow! In these moments, the fire glowed like a heart pulsing with quiet warmth, promising survival until morning light. As winter deepened, so too did the bonds formed by these nightly rituals. Families huddled together not only for warmth, but also for comfort in a world where life was uncertain and often harsh. Fireside gatherings became the stage for traditions, from telling folk tales to passing down family histories. In castles, songs and poetry filled the grand halls, while in cottages, simple lullabies were sung to children nestled under coarse blankets. The act of keeping warm became more than just physical. It was also emotional, binding communities, families, and even strangers together under the glow of firelight. In this way, medieval warmth was layered. It came from fire and fur, from stone hearths and straw beds, but also from human closeness. It was a mixture of survival and tradition, necessity and comfort. And through it all, the night carried its own rhythm, the soft crackle of firewood, the heavy breathing of sleepers, and the long silence of winter until dawn broke and the world stirred again. If we step away from the houses of ordinary peasants and imagine life in a noble home or a castle, we find another side to medieval nights. Castles were grand, built of strong stone walls, designed to stand against invaders and the test of time. Yet the very stone that made them strong also made them cold. Imagine walking into a castle chamber during winter. The walls are thick, the air is damp, the draft creeping through high, narrow windows. A small fire in the hearth might burn brightly, but the space was so large that warmth never filled the room. Nobles and lords often slept in grand beds with heavy curtains drawn around them. These bed curtains were not just for beauty or privacy, they served as a small shield against the chill. Inside the closed curtains, the warmth from body heat, furs, and blankets gathered, creating a tiny pocket of comfort within the cold stone walls. Some castle dwellers even used braziers, metal containers filled with burning coals, to bring warmth closer to where they sat or lay. But these came with risks. The coals could give off smoke or sparks, and in a room filled with wooden furniture, straw mats, or tapestries, fire was always a danger. Still, people were willing to take the risk because the bite of cold was constant and unkind. At night, servants might be tasked with keeping the fires going, though many still went out before dawn, leaving chambers shivering by morning. As castles became more developed, especially in later centuries, builders learned to create clever solutions. Some had chimneys that helped direct smoke away, making fires safer and more useful. Others used early versions of underfloor heating, where hot air could pass through small spaces below the floors. But these methods were rare and limited. For most of the Middle Ages, both rich and poor lived at the mercy of the cold. and had to rely on the simple tricks of layering, huddling, and firelight to keep themselves safe through the night. Moving outside the home, we can think of the inns and taverns that dotted medieval towns and countryside. These were places where travelers, merchants, and pilgrims might spend the night. Unlike the comfort of their own homes, these inns often forced strangers to sleep together in shared rooms. Several people might crowd into one bed, not out of friendship, but out of necessity. By sharing beds, they shared warmth. Fireplaces burned in the common areas, but in the sleeping chambers, heat was often scarce. Travelers had little choice but to tuck in close, wrap themselves in cloaks, and make the best of what was offered. For pilgrims on the road to holy sites like Santiago de Compostela or Canterbury, the challenge was even greater. Many slept in simple lodgings or even barns, depending on their means. Here, keeping warm was less about comfort and more about survival. Cloaks, boots, and layered clothing were never set aside entirely. People often slept in the very clothes they had walked in. The idea of changing into special night clothes was not common for most. Instead, night was simply a pause, time to rest with whatever protection one already had. The ways people kept warm were not always physical. They were also tied to culture and belief. In many medieval communities, people thought that cold air itself could carry illness. The idea of bad air, or miasma, was widespread. This fear meant people closed shutters tightly, stuffed fabric into cracks, and tried to keep out drafts as much as possible. Some burned herbs like rosemary or sage, believing the smoke would purify the air and chase away both sickness and cold. While this did little in reality, it gave a sense of comfort and control during long, frozen nights. Superstition also played a role. For example, some believed that placing iron objects near the bed could ward off evil spirits that lurked in the darkness. Others thought charms or prayers could protect both body and soul during vulnerable hours of sleep. In a world where medicine was limited and winters were unforgiving, blending faith, ritual, and simple physical warmth was a natural way to ease fear. Now, imagine how children experienced these nights. In many peasant families, children shared beds with siblings. Often in the loft above the main living space, where heat from the fire rose, parents might remind them to stay close together, not only for warmth but for safety. The fire below had to last the night, and if it died out, the loft could grow bitterly cold. In noble families, children might sleep in separate nurseries, but still with attendants close by to tend fires or comfort them in the drafty halls. No matter the wealth, all children of the Middle Ages grew up with the constant reality that warmth was fragile and never guaranteed. One of the more surprising facts about medieval warmth is how important animals continued to be. Even in some castle settings, stables were built close to the living quarters. The warmth of horses, cows, or other animals, when kept nearby, helped reduce the cold in surrounding rooms. In peasant cottages, this was even more common. A cow, goat, or sheep inside the home gave milk and warmth at the same time. The heat from their bodies might make the difference between comfort and misery. While it may sound unusual today, at the time it was a practical, natural choice. Looking at all of these details together, it is clear that warmth in the Middle Ages was never taken for granted. Every small action mattered. Whether it was laying straw on the floor to trap heat, sewing quilts from old fabric, pressing close to family, or tending the last glowing embers of a fire, people lived in close relationship with the cold. Unlike today, where warmth is as simple as turning on a heater, medieval life required constant effort and awareness. Each night was its own small challenge, and every family had to develop their own habits to endure it. As the centuries went on, small improvements appeared. Chimneys became more common in the later Middle Ages, making fires safer and more effective. Glass windows, though rare and expensive, allowed homes to be sealed against drafts better than wooden shutters alone. Bed designs grew more elaborate with heavier curtains and higher frames to trap warmth. Yet even with these changes, the basic struggle remained. Winter nights were long, and warmth was always earned, never assumed. If you were to close your eyes and place yourself inside a medieval home on a frosty night, what would you notice first? Perhaps the faint glow of a fire slowly fading, the hushed sound of family members breathing close together, The feel, of course, wool against your skin, and the weight of animal hides pressing down for comfort. Maybe the distant lowing of a cow or the shuffle of a dog settling near the door. All of these small details would weave together to form the fabric of medieval warmth. A mixture of resourcefulness, closeness, and resilience. This picture of the past also shows us something timeless about human life. No matter the century, people everywhere have worked to make the night a little safer, a little more comfortable, and a little more bearable. The struggle against the cold was not just about survival, it was about preserving family, protecting children, and holding on to small comforts that gave meaning to difficult times. And as you drift off to sleep, you might carry with you the quiet image of a medieval family, resting together under a pile of blankets, their fire glowing faintly, their world still and dark beyond the cottage walls. In that silence, they found enough warmth to see them through to morning. Just as people do today, in different ways, across every corner of the world. So now, if you ever wonder how people survived those long, icy nights centuries ago, the answer is simple. Through closeness, patience, and a deep respect for the warmth they could find. And with that thought, I hope you are feeling calm, cozy, and ready for rest. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the Middle Ages. If you enjoyed this gentle history, be sure to subscribe to the Gentle History for more calming stories of the past, perfect for sleep. Good night, and may your dreams be warm.